Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Good evening, and may the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. And to all the living saints, 144,000 in number, scattered throughout the whole world, greetings. I would like to read this statement in 2SR page 107. This is our episode number 2 on the subject, the opening of the seventh seal. Now let us read 2SR page 107. God, who is so particular for the good of His church in revealing His truth to His people, has presented to us wonderful pictures of historical events, which is the evidence of love everlasting for Israel, His chosen, the first fruits of His harvest. Thus the God of Jacob, thousands of years in advance, had laid His plans to present to His people a work of prophetic art with divine touch. I remember the statement in 2SR page 171 saying, "What a wonderful experience it will be when we fully comprehend the love of God and the price He paid for our salvation." We know that according to 1SR 230, as soon as sin entered in the beginning with the parents of the human family, and before they were driven out from their Eden home, the plans already devised for the return to their original home of eternal abode were made known to them as well as to the serpent. These preordained plans of God are better understood by studying His wonderful divine dealings with the human family onward through the ages as pictured in this chart. 1SR page 230. Let us now focus our whole attention to the very important subject, the opening of the seventh seal. The last seal, which is concerned the living saints, you and I, if we will be faithful. So let us read 2SR page 202. As there are 7 seals in consecutive order, it is clear that our world's history is divided into 7 different periods. The judgment begins with the first and ends with the last. Evidently, the first 6 seals complete the cases of those who were dead preceding the judgment, and while it is in session, but the 7th sealing period, being the last, must concern the living. 2SR page 202. Now, I would like to read to you the statement here on 2SR page 162. Let us read the statement. It says, "The cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final close of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living." The investigation commences after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Those who are sealed from 1929 to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9, close of provision for the church, are living saints, 144,000 in number, who shall never die, translated without tasting death. The class which neglected their opportunity were left without the seal, to perish under the ruin of Ezekiel chapter 9 and Isaiah chapter 63 and Isaiah 66 verse 15 to 17. This example of the destruction of the sinners in the church is a type of the destruction of the sinners in the world after the close of provision. The great multitude of Revelation 7 verse 9, living at the time of the close of provision for the world, shall also never die. of whom the 144,000 were a type. But all the wicked being left without the seal shall perish. Hitherto is the end of the matter. Fear God and not man, and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. Now, before elaborating, I would like to remind again the statement here in the Old Symbolic Code. 7 Symbolic Code, 7 to 12, page 19. We have learned much, and no doubt there is much more for us to learn. It is the follow-on and the go-through spirit that will finally land the remnant without fault on the heavenly Mount Zion. My conclusion is that we should give up no scripture truth, but that our false applications and interpretations of scripture and consequent false ideas of order and propriety should be given up as fast as possible. 7 Symbolic Code, 7 to 12 on page 19. So while studying the shepherd's rod, brothers and sisters, let us always remember that admonition given in 7 Symbolic Code, 7 to 12, page 19. And I think more particularly with this paragraph into SR page 162. Now let me read to you here in 1TG number 13, page 7. It says here, the pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, and for sure the pioneers mentioned here, Sister White is included among those pioneers. And it says, the pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination expected the Lord to come as soon as the 144,000 converts joined the church and expected to live to see him come. The church membership, though, already numbers several times 144,000, and the pioneers are dead, and the Lord is yet to come. So the question is not whether we want to change our minds or not, but whether we have to change. Now, pertaining to the pioneers of the Davidian this day organization, they had also expectation that they will be a part of that special company, the living saints, the saints that will no longer to taste death. But the fact is that all the pioneers are now dead. So the only safe method is that let us distinctly separate their expectation and the scriptural truth, the very message written in the Shepherd's Rod publications, that accordingly we should not give up any scriptural truth, but whatever false expectations which resulted them to misapply the statement because of such expectation. As the truth progresses, accordingly, it should be given up as fast as possible. We already read in track number 5 on page 74. Let's read track number 5 on page 74. It says, it will be noted that the 144,000 are called the first fruits, denoting that they are sealed at the beginning of the harvest, the commencement of the time to separate the tares from the wheat. Track number 5, page 74. So the Shepherd's Rod is plainly telling us that the 144,000 are sealed in the period called the beginning of the harvest. Because accordingly, in answerer number 2, page 36, saying it shows that the harvest is a period of time having a beginning and ending, and that during its time men are saved. Answerer number 2, page 36. That accordingly, the harvest is a period of time, but divided into 2 sections. The first section of the period of the harvest is called the beginning of the harvest. And the second section is called the ending of the harvest. Although this subject is more explained in detail on the subject, the wave sheep and the wave loaves. Now, since we already proven with absolute fact that the 144,000 are sealed on the first section of the harvest, which is called the beginning, track number 5, page 74, saying, it will be noted that the 144,000 are sealed at the beginning of the harvest, the first period of the harvest, because harvest is a period of time having a beginning and ending. Then we can immediately understood that in the last period of the harvest, which is the ending, the one to be sealed in that period of time, which is the second section of the harvest, is the second fruits, the great multitude which no man could number. Now here in track number 3, page 70 and page 71, the second section of the separation thus being completed, provisionary time is closed, whereupon from the wicked will be heard the horrible wail of doom. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Jeremiah 8 verse 20. This being the dreadful experience of the tares in Babylon, in the second section of the harvest, there must as a type be a similar and precedent experience for the tares in the Laodicean church in the first section of the harvest. Track number 3, page 70 and page 71. Now let us focus our attention, of course, to the first section of the harvest, the sealing of the 144,000. Of course, brothers and sisters, we will not follow the attitude of the foolish virgins. They become interested in studying the subject at the time when everything is too late. I remember the statement in 2SR 147. It says, will you, brother, will you, sister, adorn yourself with the righteousness of Christ? Or will you wait a little longer until after the harvest is past? Someone shall utter the following words in great disappointment. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Jeremiah 8 verse 20. Shall you or shall I? 2SR page 147. And for sure, accordingly, that period of time by which the wicked will utter such disappointing words is at the time when they were still living, when they were still alive. Let us read one symbolic code, number 14, page 11. If the harvest is after the close of provision, why should they say, the harvest is past, the summer is ended? For they certainly could not say these words before probation closes. Neither could they after the second coming of Christ, for then they would be dead and could not speak. Consequently, the only time these words could be spoken is in the period between the close of provision and the second coming of Christ, which fact places the harvest before probation closes. Now, the second coming of Christ mentioned here could not be the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, because for sure, long before that time, the wicked, all wicked Sabbath keepers were already dead. That accordingly, on the 7 days slaughtering, which we commonly understood as the half-hour silence, in that period of time, 7 days slaughtering, the mere fact that it is called the general destruction, indicating that after the 7 days slaughtering, no more wicked Sabbath keepers were in existence. All of them at that time were dead. And the only Sabbath keepers that remain after the 7 days slaughtering are the righteous Sabbath keepers. Now I would like to read 1 TG 52:21. 1 TG 52:21. So let us read. Do you, brother, sister, actually comprehend, actually realize the crisis as outlined here? Do you see the prediction that the sealing message is to be resisted by those who foster the abominations? Are you with them? I hope not. Is there then any question that if the brethren are left ignorant of this cleansing work that God is about to do among His people, I say, if they be left ignorant of it, will they not fall in the general destruction of the wicked, represented by the work of the 5 men bearing slaughter weapons? 1 TG 52, page 21. Now, the shepherd's rod is plainly telling us that the general destruction of all the wicked Sabbath keepers, that is, during the 7 days slaughtering, by which the one who will destroy all of them, the remaining wicked Sabbath keepers, the one who will destroy all of them, which is the final destruction of all the wicked Sabbath keepers, are the 5 angels bearing slaughtering weapons in their hands. Now, brothers and sisters, we need now to study closely concerning such slaughtering. Now, I would like to read to you 3 symbolic code. Number 1, page 8. Therefore, as there are 2 separations, it says, there is a double fulfillment of Ezekiel's slaughter. One in the church before the close of provision, and the other in the worldly churches after the close of provision. When everyone has made his decision, the unfaithful spiritual guardians or the false watchmen of the people are the first to fall in the worldly churches, just as the ancient men who are in the Seventh-day Adventist Church are the first to fall. This is the only explanation that will harmonize every statement on this subject found in the spirit of prophecy and in the Bible. Although this subject is more deal in detail on the subject, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. But I would like to give only general information that according to this passage, the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 has a double application. There is a slaughtering prior to the close of provision, and the second fulfillment of such slaughtering is after the close of provision. For sure, the statement that the very first slaughtering is before the close of provision cannot or could not be construed that there is a slaughtering before the 144,000 spiritual Israel are completely sealed. Because the Bible is very plain in Revelation 7 that there is no hurting while the 144,000 are not yet completely sealed. So the statement, the slaughtering before the close of provision, is pointing to the close of provision to all Sabbath keepers. That before probation close, to all Sabbath keepers, there must be a slaughtering. And the second fulfillment of such slaughtering is after probation close to all Sabbath keepers throughout the whole world. Because as far as the Bible is thus concerned, brothers and sisters, the main subject in Ezekiel chapter 9 is Judah and Israel. Now let us read 1 TG number 3, page 12. 1 TG number 3, page 12. It says, and it is entitled, The Purification of the Church. And we'll touch just a little concerning the subject, the purification of the church. Because when we will be studying the subject, the opening of the seventh seal, it is connected to all other subjects. Now let's read 1 TG number 3, page 12. The question is the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 to take place in the world or in the church? Is it the 7 last plagues or is it the purification of the church? I will no longer read Ezekiel 9, verse 1, verse 4, and 9. This is the answer given by the shepherd's rod. The angels have charge of the city, Jerusalem, not of the world, and not of Babylon. Even an altogether uninformed Christian knows that the terms Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel mean the church, never even as much as implied the world. They have always meant the church and always will mean the church, for that is what they are. 1 TG number 3, page 12. Here's another statement in 1 TG 21 on page 15. It says, the promise to purify Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel stands as sure as any promise in the Word. The terms Jerusalem, Judah, Israel, cannot be applied to anything but to the church. 1 TG 21, page 15. Accordingly, brothers and sisters, that the term Jerusalem or Zion, Judah, Israel can never be applied to the world. Therefore, to understand this statement in 3 symbolic code, number 1, page 8, saying that the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 has a double fulfillment. And since the focal point of the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 is only Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel, and here it was divided into 2 divisions, the slaughtering before the close of provision, by which the shepherd's rod says, one in the church before the close of provision, and the other in the worldly churches after the close of provision, can be easily understood that the worldly churches mentioned here must be pertaining to all Sabbath keepers. Now, in this study, let us now study closely. Who are they to be slaughtered? Who are they, the Sabbath keepers, to be slaughtered prior to the close of provision? And who are they, the Sabbath keepers, to be slaughtered after the close of provision? So we will be focusing to that subject. Now, I would like to read answerer number 2, page 42 and page 43. Is the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 literal? No, it says here, the 5 agents that destroy the wicked in the church are not forces of nature, but men with slaughter weapons in their hands. They are supernatural beings, not natural elements. Hence, they cannot fittingly represent earthquakes, famines, or the like. Neither can they be the 7 angels with the 7 last plagues. For these angels are 7 in number, not 5. Furthermore, they do not have slaughter weapons in their hands, but vials. Still further, the plagues fall in Babylon, Revelation 18 verse 4, whereas the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 takes place in Judah and Israel, Ezekiel 9 verse. So, the shepherd's rod is very specific by mentioning that the plagues, the 7 last plagues, in Revelation 15 and Revelation 16, there are 7 angels. But the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9, there are only 5 angels. That is one of the reason that it could not be the same. Now let me read to you track number 3 on page 70-71. It says, thus in the first section of the harvest, the separation in the church. The wicked are destroyed by 6 men with slaughter weapons before the good are taken out. And in the second section, the separation among the churches in Babylon, the wicked are destroyed by 7 angels with the 7 last plagues after the good are taken out. There are therefore 2 separations and 2 fruits. The former gives the first fruits, the 144,000, who are not defiled with women. Track number 3, page 71. Now here the statement is very plain. The wicked are destroyed by 6 men with slaughter weapons. Track number 3, page 71. For sure, brothers and sisters, the statement in track number 15, let us read. Track number 15, page 78. From the aforementioned examples, we already see that the time has come for all faithful Bible students after saving truth, to realize that inspiration never does anything vain or careless. Its work is ever accurately constructed, always dependable at face value, and explicit beyond improvement. So that is very plain here in track number 15, page 78. So if that is the description of the inspired writings that never does anything vain or careless, its work is ever accurately constructed, always dependable at face value and explicit beyond improvement, then for sure, the slaughtering mentioned in track number 3, page 71, saying 6 angels to destroy the wicked, could not be the same with the statement 5 angels to destroy the wicked. Let's read again. In 1 TG number 52 on page 21, it says, do you, brother, sister, actually comprehend, actually realize the crisis as outlined here? Do you see the prediction that the sealing message is to be resisted by those who foster the abominations? Are you with them? I hope not. Is there then any question that if the brethren are left ignorant of this cleansing work that God is about to do among His people, I say, if they be left ignorant of it, will they not fall in the general destruction of the wicked, represented by the work of the 5 men bearing slaughter weapons? 1 TG 52:21. Now, for sure, the slaughtering mentioned in track number 3, page 71, takes place before the slaughtering mentioned in 1 TG 52:21, or the statement in answerer number 2, pages 42 and page 43. For the slaughtering of the 5 angels bearing slaughter weapon in their hands is called general destruction. And since that is general destruction, it can be plainly understood that after that slaughtering, there will be no more wicked Sabbath keepers to be in existence, because all of them had been completely destroyed. And for sure, secondly, the slaughtering mentioned in track number 3, page 71, could not be the same the slaughtering mentioned in 1 TG 52:21, because inspiration cannot be mistaken. The slaughtering in 1 TG 52:21, there are only 5 angels, whereas the slaughtering on track number 3, page 71, there are 6 angels. So we need to distinctly separate, brothers and sisters. But here in Trisymbolic Code 1, page 8, there is a division of the 2 slaughterings. The slaughtering that will occur prior to the close of provision, and the slaughtering that will occur after the close of provision. There must be dividing line. But the question is that, how many slaughtering that will occur prior to the final close of provision of all Sabbath keepers? And how many slaughtering that will occur after the close of provision of all Sabbath keepers? Now, I would like to read some statement here on the old symbolic code. One symbolic code, number 15, page 9. It says, as both citations in the above must be correct, it proves that the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 takes place before the commencement of the loud cry. The same truth can be proved by the Bible from several different angles. Now, let us read again the statement. As both citations in the above must be correct, it proves that the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 takes place before the commencement of the loud cry. So to understand the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9, we need to have clear conception concerning the message of the loud cry. Now for sure, brothers and sisters, the only verse in the Bible, the only chapter by which you can read 6 angels is in Ezekiel chapter 9. Now let's go back again to track number 3. Track number 3 on page 71. It says, the reason that the church is figuratively not Babylon. So let's say it again. The reason that the church is figuratively not Babylon is that it is called Jerusalem, Ezekiel 9 verse 4 and 8, and from among the good therein, the wicked, the tares, are destroyed, taken out by the 6 men with the slaughter weapons. And the quotation is Ezekiel 9 verse 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then afterward, the good, the wheat, are gathered in the barn, while from among the wicked in Babylon, the just, my people, are called out and gathered into the barn. And then the 7 angels pour out the 7 last plagues, and the remaining wicked are destroyed. Then it says, thus, in the first section of the harvest, the separation in the church, the wicked are destroyed by 6 men with slaughter weapons. The statement, destroyed by 5 men with slaughter weapons and destroyed by 6 men with slaughter weapons, the quotation is the same chapter, Ezekiel 9. Remember, Apostle Paul plainly told us in 1 Corinthians 14:33 that God is not the author of confusion. So here, brothers and sisters, to avoid being confused, God divided the slaughtering, as stated here in 3 Symbolic Code 1.8. The slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 has a double application. The first slaughtering is before the final close of provision, and the second slaughtering is after the close of provision. And the mere fact that it is the slaughtering by which the 5 angels will be the one to destroy the wicked are called the general destruction of all the wicked, as stated in Testimonies Volume 3 267 and 1 TG 52:21. Then we can easily discern that the slaughtering by which the description, there are 6 men to destroy the wicked in the church, could not be the slaughtering after the close of provision, but rather the slaughtering before the close of provision. And the slaughtering after probation close are described 5 men bearing slaughter weapons in their hands. Now let us now study closely this subject, but to repeat again, we will discuss it on the subject, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Now, according to 1 Symbolic Code number 15, page 9, the shepherd's rod is very plain that the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 takes place before the commencement of the loud cry. So let us read again 1 Symbolic Code number 15, page 9. It says, as both citations in the above must be correct, it proves that the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 takes place before the commencement of the loud cry. But the thing is that we need to ascertain clearly what is slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 that takes place before the commencement of the loud cry, Is it the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9, which is pointing to the 6 angels? Or is it the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9, which pertains to the 5 angels? Because the slaughtering, by which the description is 6 angels, and the slaughtering, by which the description is 5 angels, both of them is the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9. Now here's another statement in to symbolic code number 7 and 8, page 11. Who are the slain of the Lord in the time of persecution? Are they of the heathen, of fallen Protestantism, or are they professed Sabbath keepers? Answer: those who are slain before the commencement of the loud cry in fulfillment of Isaiah 66 verse 16 are professed Sabbath keepers. So here the shepherd's rod says that those who will be slaughtered before the commencement of the loud cry are professed Sabbath keepers who fail in the time of the closing work for the church to receive the seal of God. We know the closing work for the church is the sealing time of the 144,000 spiritual Israel. For sure, the very first slaughtering must be the slaughtering that will occur after the 144,000 are completely sealed. And let us read again the statement. Those who are slain before the commencement of the loud cry in fulfillment of Isaiah 66 verse 16 are professed Sabbath keepers who fail in the time of the closing work for the church to receive the seal of God. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 3, page 266. Then it says, see the September Code in 1935, page 7. However, those who are slain in fulfillment of Revelation 9, verse 18, see our track Final Warning on the subject of the 7 trumpets, pages 65 to page 92. In the time of the loud cry are those who come in close contact with the church of God and who could be either heathen or professed Christians of several characters, namely such as those who openly war against the church and those who pretend to believe in her teachings, but who, as those who were destroyed in the Exodus movement, are by their sins working against the church to weaken their lines of defense, thus endeavoring to cause her to fall helpless before her enemies. Now the shepherd's rod attached Revelation 9 verse 18, plainly telling that the slaughtering during the loud cry proclamation of the message, that is the slaughtering mentioned in Revelation 9 verse 18. And we know Revelation 9 verse 18, it is 200 million cavalrymen or 200 million horsemen, brothers and sisters, right? And accordingly, those angels in Revelation 9 verse 18, they will perform their God-given task to destroy the wicked is during the period of the loud cry proclamation of the message. So we need to study closely Revelation 9 verse 18. Now, but at this time, I would like to focus to that predicted event by which, accordingly, only the firstborn sons were endangered. Brothers and sisters, only the firstborn sons, according to the shepherd's rod. Here in One SR Pocket Edition, page 55 and page 56. The Passover too, in which perished all the firstborn of men and beasts that were found in dwellings which had not the blood on the doorposts, forspoke an antitypical Passover in which all who are left without the mark because of not sighing and crying for the abominations in their midst will surely fall under the slaughter weapons of the angels. Ezekiel 9 verse 2. When will this come to pass? The type unquestionably reveals the time through the fact that only the firstborn were then in danger. Accordingly, the antitypical Passover will take place in the time of the first fruit harvest, the sealing of the 144,000, the first fruits, the first to go to antitypical Jerusalem, the first to stand on Mount Zion with the Lamb, the firstborn by the Spirit. Obviously, all of the first fruits who received the mark will live on, and all who fail to receive the mark will perish as surely as did the firstborn, who at the time of the typical Passover failed to apply the blood on the doorpost. One is our packet edition, page 55 and page 56. Notice the statement says, accordingly, the antitypical Passover will take place in the time of the first fruit harvest, the sealing of the 144,000, the first fruits, the first to go to antitypical Jerusalem. Now, this reading, brothers and sisters, it seems that there is a possibility that during the sealing of the 144,000, there is a destruction, brothers and sisters. But it is even more pointing particularly to the firstborn sons, the ministry. And that is why, brothers and sisters, it is not a joke, brothers and sisters, but rather it is a very serious matter to be in the ministry, because the highest responsibility will be upon our shoulders, and we will be the very first one to be subject with such vengeance of an offended God. I remember that statement in the writings of B.T. Halton. Now, I would like to read this reading in 2 SR 169. It says, in that night, wherever the blood appeared on the doorpost, the firstborn, whether male or female, perish not. Just so now, those who receive the zeal have applied the blood on the doorpost, forehead, and as the firstborn of both classes, those who died and those who did not, were a type of the present priesthood ministry. Evidently, the type points forward to a ministry in the antitype, made up of both sexes. The firstborn who died represent the class that shall fall under the slaughter weapons of the 5 men. And the firstborn who escaped from death represent the class that shall receive the mark of the man with the writer's inkhorn and pass from death to life. Thus the firstborn who lived and passed through the Red Sea are a type of the 144,000. The first fruits of the harvest are the servants of God in the time of the loud cry of the third angel's message. Now, in this reading, the shepherd's rod is very specific that the firstborn, the ministry, the one who will destroy them, those ministry by which the present truth is not found in their movement. The only dwellings that there is a blood, figuratively, there is a blood on the doorpost, are only the ministry, the movement by which the present truth is bestowed by God unto them. It is high time now, brothers and sisters, that we need to meditate and humbly bow down before God and ascertain clearly, does the present truth is found in the movement where I belong, brothers and sisters? Because even you are inside that house, you are within that house, as long as that house there is no blood in the doorpost, the angel will enter and all of them will be destroyed. And the only dwellings and the only house by which the angel will not enter therein are the dwellings by which there is a blood on the doorpost, by which in the antitypical significance it points out to the present truth. Let us now study closely, brothers and sisters, this wonderful prophecy in 2SR page 169. Although the shepherd's rod made it so plain in 1TG 42, on page 10, 1TG 42, page 10, it says, you certainly now see Zion's reward and God's mighty effort to inform you of this truth. What is Zion's reward? What is the reward, brothers and sisters? Are we belong to that pronouncement? Woe to the sinners in Zion. Let's read again the statement in 2SR page 100 and 101. If God's ideal is to bless the world through the medium of His church on earth, and they to whom the gospel for the world is committed have left the sheep and are serving the devil in the person of themselves, where is the hope of the world? The only answer that can be given is, woe to the sinners in Zion. Why is it that is the only answers that can be given? It is a solemn warning. What is Zion? Headquarters. Here in White House Recruiter, on page 53. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and it says, at headquarters. Because Zion is the palace grounds, according to track number 8, page 5. So Zion represent those who are in the headquarters. Why is it that there is a divine pronouncement, woe unto them? Because for sure, the Zion mentioned in that reading by which there is a divine pronouncement that woe unto them. It's so because, brothers and sisters, that in spite of the fact that the present truth is not found in their movements, they are the very ones who hinder God's people to accept the present truth. That is the reality, brothers and sisters. They are the very ones. And B.T. Hotep says that they are trying their best that no one would escape landing in hell. 1 TG number 18, page 17, saying, what a responsibility supposed to be. Rest upon the shoulders, those who are in the ministry. But what they did, they are the very ones who are hindering the message. And what they are after, as illustrated in the wholesale deception, is the name. Brothers and sisters, the name. They will study the shepherd's rod or the Bible and then found a name, then called their movement in that name. The attitude of the Sunday keepers, the same attitude among the media. Brothers and sisters, what they are after is the name. Calling it when they discovered, oh, this name is a beautiful name, Bashan. So let us call our movement Bashan. This name is a beautiful name, Gilead. Let us call our movement Gilead. This name is a beautiful name, Bronze. Let us call our movement Bronze. Would you think, brothers and sisters, if that is the case, if that is really the Bashan mentioned in the Bible, and that is really the Bronze mentioned in the Bible, thus the Bronze and Bashan and Gilead recorded in the Bible are three different movements and hostile against each other's faith, a divine competition. Brothers and sisters, the movement which is of God, my dear brothers and sisters, is well marked by obedience to present truth in 2SR 125. When that movement in 1844, after the disappointment, when they were now organizing and trying to find out what name that they will adopt, some even suggest to call their name Church of God. But God's servant, the prophet, Sister White, says, the name the Lord has given us is Seventh-day Adventist. You cannot read in the Bible, Seventh-day Adventist. There are many movements that they will say, our movement is the true movement because it is found in the Bible, Church of God. Word for word, it is found in the Bible, Church of Christ, Church of the Holy Spirit. Brothers and sisters, to repeat again, in 1844, according to the Shepherd's Rod, the only church which recognized by God as His is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Why? Because the present truth is bestowed by God into that movement. So the only way that you could recognize God's true movement is through the present truth. Or in other words, the movement which is of God, by which the present truth had been deposited by God into that movement. For example, the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1844, that is the Church of God. Although the movement is not called Church of God, but that is the Church of God. The movement in 1844, by which the present truth is bestowed by God into that movement, that is the Church of Christ. That is the Church of the Holy Ghost. That is very plain. So in this study, brothers and sisters, the true if Bashan is a good pasture, and the only pasture which is called good pasture is the pasture by which the present truth is found. Now I would like to read this reading in 1 TG 45:20. That shepherds are slain because they have kept the sheep away from the Lord's green pasture, present truth. 1 TG 45, page 20. So wherever that green pasture could be found, which is the present truth, that is figuratively called as Bashan. That is the true Bashan. Not Bashan in name, but Bashan in nature. Because the present truth is there. That is the true Gilead. That is the true Mount Carmel. Now, I would like to read to you again, 1 TJ 42:10. You certainly know the Zion's reward and God's mighty effort to inform you of this truth. You surely will do all you can to escape God's vengeance and to join this layman's movement for the gathering of the people. 1 TG number 42, page 10. And here in 2 TG 21, page 15, it says, you must therefore not fail to wholeheartedly and actually join this mighty layman's movement for revival and reformation throughout Laodicea, and to finish the gospel work with a church fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners. She is to go forth into all the world, conquering and to conquer. Prophets and Kings 725. You cannot afford to lose out. 2 TG number 21, page 15. Now let us read again the statement in 2SR page 100 and 101. If God's ideal is to bless the world through the medium of His church on earth, and they to whom the gospel for the world is committed have left the sheep and are serving the devil in the persons of themselves, where is the hope of the world? The only answer that can be given is, woe to the sinners in Zion. Why? It is a divine pronouncement, brothers and sisters, a solemn renunciation that before that woe that will be executed, let us humble ourselves and repent. What the shepherd's rod is trying to tell us is that you cannot forever deceive the 144,000. You cannot forever deceive the living saints, brothers and sisters. And that is why the next sentence it says, God will gather His sheep. He will have a church. But what will be the reward of those who were instructed to feed the lambs and are feeding themselves? Christ, who sees the end from the beginning and with His all-seeing eye focused on present-day conditions, has said, who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household to give them meat in due season? Or in this reading, God wants us to completely awaken that we need to look that faithful and wise servant by which unto him God bestowed all his goods. What is the goods? Present truth. In 2 TG number 11, it says, page 15, the talents in this parable represents the Lord's goods, His timely messages for the people. 2 TG 11:15, and we know timely messages is also called meat in due season, the present truth. And it is definitely stated in 2SR 179. It says, who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household to give them to the world meat in due season, present truth. Present truth. Or in other words, God is telling you and I that's supposed to be what we need to be after. We are after for present truth. We are after for meat in due season. And that is plainly connected to our subject concerning the opening of the seventh seal. Brothers and sisters, when does the 144,000 are sealed? It is at the opening of the seventh seal. Now, let us read again 2SR page 220. It says here, 2SR 220. The 144,000 are sealed before the silence of half an hour or at the opening of the seal, but they are judged in the period of the seventh seal, for the prayer was for all saints the living. What judgment mentioned here? Blotting out of sins. Now let us read in the next paragraph says, for the judgment, blotting out the sins, is the crowning act in the gospel of Christ. So the blotting out of sins, that proceedings will be in the period of the seventh seal, but the 144,000 are sealed prior to the period of the seventh seal. But they are sealed at the opening of the seventh seal. We already read in our first edition, in tract number 9, page 53 and 54, the Revelator, moreover, was told that the things about which he was to write were to be hereafter. Revelation 4 verse 1, after 96 AD. When he had the vision, and furthermore, the sealing of the 144,000 takes place in the period of the sixth seal, just prior to the opening of the seventh seal. And to repeat again, it seems that there is a seeming contradiction to the statement in 2SR, page 220, that the 144,000 are sealed at the opening of the seventh seal. But here in tract number 9, it says, tract number 9, page 54, the sealing of the 144,000 takes place in the period of the sixth seal, just prior to the opening of the seventh seal. Does this statement contradicts 2SR 220? No. They are in perfect harmony. Now let us read 2SR page 220. It says, the 144,000 are sealed before the silence of half an hour or at the opening of the seal. But in tract number 9, page 54, the sealing of the 144,000, the term sealed is accomplished fact that at the opening of the seventh seal, the 144,000 are already completely sealed. The sealing finished. Whereas the sealing, while it is in progress, going on, takes place prior to the opening of the seventh seal, according to this reading. The sealing of the 144,000, tract number 9, page 54, takes place in the period of the sixth seal, just prior to the opening of the seventh seal. The word sealing is a noun, and it is a gerund. A noun, which is a gerund, it is derived from the verb. The verb in ing form, meaning progressive. So the term sealing, that is the period of time by which it is still on process, on progress. But the word sealed, that is accomplished fact. Therefore, at the commencement of the opening of the seventh seal, according to this reading in 2SR 220, the 144,000 are sealed. The sealing is finished. But the sealing of the 144,000 takes place just prior to the opening of the seventh seal, because the opening of the seventh seal takes place when the 144,000 are completely sealed. But the sealing of the 144,000 takes place just prior to the opening of the seventh seal. And they are sealed at the opening of the seventh seal. Now let's go back to the very first reading that we read in 2SR page 162. Let's read again. It says, the cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final close of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living. Brothers and sisters, the word while, let me read to you in the dictionary. It says here, while. The word while, it is a noun. A period of time, it says. So, the word while, it is a noun and point to a period of time or in the meantime or as long as or during that time, in that period of time. I would like to define that words in the Shepherd's Rod Publications, track number 9, page 10. While the earth remaineth, moreover, promises the Lord, seed time and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter and day and night shall not cease. Genesis 8 verse 22. The words while the earth remaineth, expressly denoting limitation of time, imply that though the earth will not always remain, yet as long as it does, the conditions named will prevail. Track number 9, page 10. So the word while connotes limitation of time. Or in other words, the statement while living must be pointing to the saints that are destined to die. Because you cannot use that statement to the saints who will no longer to taste death. While living. While in reality, they will no longer to taste death. So this reading must be pointing to the prediction I would like to read to you. Track number 3, page 20. Let's read the statement here. It says, for Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 24. Indeed, now once in the end of the world hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, and as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. Hebrews 9 verse 26 and 27. The cleansing of the sanctuary. Daniel 8 verse 14. Plainly therefore, the judgment is to begin and the sanctuary to be cleansed, not before, but after the fulfillment of the period for those appointed to die. The judging being consistent with the records found in the books of heaven, the names therefore of those who are found unworthy without the wedding garment on are blotted from the books. Thus is the sanctuary cleansed. Speaking of the commencement of this work of judging and cleansing, the angel said unto Daniel, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Daniel 8 verse 14. Now the statement says, I would like to read again, track number 3, page 20. Plainly, therefore, the judgment is to begin. And we know the judgment begins in October 22, 1844. But it was not cleansed. The cleansing is in progress. And the cleansing or the time with the sanctuary in heaven will be completely cleansed. It is not before the fulfillment of those appointed to die, but rather after the fulfillment of the period for those appointed to die. It says, the sanctuary be cleansed, not before. Track number 3 on page 20, it says, the sanctuary to be cleansed, not before, but after the fulfillment of the period for those appointed to die. Therefore, that statement in track number 3, page 20, that there is a proceedings by which such proceedings, brothers and sisters, such proceedings is the judicial proceedings to those people
being judged in the heavenly sanctuary while living. The statement while living is synonymous to the statement in track number 3, page 20, appointed to die. You cannot use that statement, appointed to die, if such person is already dead. The statement appointed to die, meaning while he was still alive, but he is destined to die, appointed to die. The same with Apostle Paul, when Apostle Paul says that I am appointed to die in Jerusalem. Now, let us gradually decipher this prophecy, brothers and sisters. First, the shepherd's rod already told us in that reading in track number 3, page 20, that the sanctuary will not be completely cleansed not until after the proceedings of those who are appointed to die. Therefore, when that proceedings had been completely ended, to the people who are appointed to die, and they were judged in the heavenly sanctuary while living, and after their proceedings had been completely finished, then after that, the sanctuary is cleansed. Not before, but after the fulfillment of the proceedings of those who are appointed to die. By which, here in 2SR 162, let us read again. The cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final close of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living. So this investigation of the people by which their cases are being investigated in the heavenly sanctuary while living, by which after their proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary completely finished, then all of them are appointed to die, destined to die. Brothers and sisters, now let us go to the next sentence. It says, the investigation commences after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. So, if we could be able to make a little illustration diagram, we can immediately discern fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Let us only place commencement, then question mark, then close, question mark, then put in the middle fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Then after that event, that period of time, fulfillment of Ezekiel 9, the proceedings begins to those who are appointed to die while living. I would like to read 2SR 202. As there are 7 seals in consecutive order, it is clear that our world history is divided into 7 different periods. The judgment begins with the first and ends with the last. Now let us focus first to that statement. The judgment begins with the first and ends with the last. Now let us read track number 3. Then go back to 2SR. Track number 3 on page 16 and page 17. These verses reveal that after the judgment was set and the books were opened, the Son of Man, Christ, was then brought to a position not at the right hand of God, the Ancient of Days, but near before Him. Daniel 7 verse 8 to 10 and 13. Track number 3, page 16 and page 17. Both John's and Daniel's vision reveal that the throne in the sanctuary was not there from the beginning of the creation, from the beginning of the creation of God, or from the days of Moses, or yet from the hour that Christ ascended on high, or even from the days of pagan Rome. That indeed it was not set up until after the fall of pagan Rome, when the little horn of the nondescript beast came up in the days of ecclesiastical Rome. Daniel 7, verse 7 to 12, verse 21 and 22. Track number 3, page 16 and page 17. And we know that the actual beginning of the judgment begins in 1844. What I'm trying to emphasize, brothers and sisters, is that, to repeat again, let us distinctly separate the occurrence that takes place on earth and the occurrence that takes place in heaven. More particularly to the subject, the 7 trumpets and the 7 seals. Now let us read track number 5, page 34. In the main, however, the trumpets and the seals portray an event which is future from John's time and which takes place in heaven, although they also portray kindred events. Of these related events, some are contributory and some are consequent to the main prophetic event. The former naturally precede and the latter naturally follow it historically. So this reading is very plain that both the subject of the 7 trumpets and the subject of the 7 seals, the main prophetic event, takes place in heaven. The occurrence that takes place on earth is called the kindred events, related events, by which some events are contributory and some are consequent to the main prophetic event. Now, since we are now focusing our subject to the last 2 seals, the 6th seal and the 7th seal, by which the shepherd's rod made it so plain here in 2 TG number 12, page 30. Let us read again. The contents of the 7 seals, therefore, comprehends all mankind and must begin with Adam, the first man on earth. This fact is again particularly noticeable from the fact that the things which the first 5 seals revealed are covered in 1, 2, or 3 verses respectively, whereas the last 2 seals, which contain the things that pertain to the judgment of the living, to the people who must know that their cases are on trial, are quiet long. The record of the things which the 6th seal reveals is 22 verses long, and the 7th seal is 15 chapters long. 2 TG 12, 30 and 31. Now, here in this reading, in 2 TG 12, page 30 and page 31, the shepherd's rod made it so plain that the last 2 seals is pertain to the judgment of the living. Now the question is that, does it contradicts to the statement in 2 SR 202 that the first 6 seals is intended to the saints that will be resurrected? No, it is not. It is in perfect harmony. Because the 6th seal mentioned in that reading, by which it says that the last seal, or the last 2 seals, the 6th seal and the 7th seal, which pertains to the judgment of the living, the only portion under the 6th seal, by which it is the judgment of the living, is the constituent, the last constituent of the 6th seal, by which they are judged while living. Although they will be a part of the resurrected saints, but their proceedings is already called the judgment of the living, in spite of the fact that they were under the 6th seal, by which the 6th seal is the last seal that pertains to the saints that will be resurrected. But the shepherd's rod called it judgment of the living, because the last constituent of the 6th seal, they will be judged while living. And that is why it is called judgment of the living under the 6th seal to the saints, by which destined to die, and their cases are in judicial proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary at the time while they were still alive, while living. Now, I would like to read track number 1, page 35. The bright light going among the living creatures with the swiftness of lightning represents the speed with which this work will finally go forward to completion in behalf of His people during the judgment hour. For the faces of the living creatures are figurative of the saints in time of judgment. The faces of the cherubim being the same as those of the beast of the Revelation, they both necessarily have complementary significance. The key to which John supplies, and they sang a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. Revelation 5 verse 9. So the four living creatures in Ezekiel chapter 1, according to this reading, in track number 1, page 35, have the same complementary significance to the four beasts in Revelation chapter 5. Therefore, we can easily understand that if the four beasts in Revelation chapter 5 represents four representatives to be judged, therefore the four living creatures in Ezekiel chapter 1 must also be four representatives to be judged. Now let us read 2SR 195. It says, And the four beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. Revelation 4 verse 8. Full of eyes. Eyes are to give light to the body. Therefore, they stand as a symbol signifying that God's people have had sufficient light in every age. Before and behind denotes prophetic light revealing to them the past, present, and future. This being made possible by the Spirit of God and by holy angels. The number 4 shows that there are 4 classes of saints to be considered in the judgment. 2 of these classes are to be resurrected, namely those who died naturally and those who were martyred. 2SR page 195. Now, let us ponder deeply, brothers and sisters, to the statement given by the voice of inspiration. First, we already read, right, in track number 1, page 35, that whatever the significance of the 4 living creatures in Ezekiel chapter 1, they were, brothers and sisters, signifying the same significance to the 4 beasts in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. What are the 4 beasts in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5? They are 4 representatives by which 2 of them are to be resurrected and 2 of them are to be translated. Now, concerning the 6th seal, because we are focusing to the last seal under the saints that will be resurrected. Now, here in track number 5, let us read again the statement. In track number 5, on page 109 and 110, let us read. Thus, the temple, the first and the largest object, must represent the first and largest body of righteous dead, those from Adam's time to the beginning of the judgment in 1844. So they are called the temple. And if you will read 2 TG 12:30, the temple, it points out to the first 5 seals. So let us read 2 TG number 12 on page 30. It says, The contents of the 7 seals, therefore, comprehends all mankind and must begin with Adam. So the same with the statement here in track number 5, page 109 and 110. Begin with Adam, the first man on earth, This fact is again particularly noticeable from the fact that the things which the first 5 seals revealed are covered in 1, 2, or 3 verses, respectively, whereas the last 2 seals, which contain the things that pertain to the judgment of the living, to the people who must know that their cases are on trial, are quite long. The record of the things which the 6th seal reveals is 22 verses long, and the 7th seal is 15 chapters long. The last 2 seals pertains to the judgment of the living. Now, the 6th seal, brothers and sisters, is represented by the altar. And the altar commenced in 1844. But such occurrence that pertains to the altar is on the earthly sanctuary, not in heaven. Because in October 22, 1844, the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, those who died under the first seal, not the 6th seal. So the sealing, brothers and sisters, that pertains to the earth, to the earthly sanctuary, pertains to the altar, which is the 6th seal, began in October 22, 1844. That's why, to repeat again, the main prophetic event pertaining to the subject 7 seals is the sealing. So, the statement in track number 5, page 34, the kindred event is the earthquake. You remember in 2SR 221 that the 6th seal commenced in 1755 up to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. But it's very important to be very familiar the subject, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. It is a very broad subject, brothers and sisters. But the Shepherd's Rod made it so plain in 2SR 221. The 6th seal, that is from 1755 to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Although it was enumerated one by one, summary of commencement and termination of seals. The first seal covers the entire period from Adam to the flood. The second seal from the flood to Abraham. The third seal from Abraham to Jesus Christ. The fourth seal from Christ to 1500 AD. The fifth seal from 1500 AD to 1755. The sixth seal from 1755 AD to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Then the seventh seal from the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9 to the close of provision. So, the occurrence in 1755, which is the earthquake, that is the kindred events. So, we have earthquake, kindred event. Then we have darkening of the sun, related event. Then we have moon become blood, contributory event. And then we have the falling of the stars, consequent to the main prophetic event, 1833. And then we have the main prophetic event, the sealing under the sixth seal, begins in October 22, 1844. But earthly sanctuary, not heavenly. But the subject that we are studying is heavenly sanctuary. The period in October 22, 1844, the commencement of the judgment, that is the commencement of the period of the first seal in the heavenly sanctuary. And that is the main prophetic event. We already read, right? Track number 5, page 34. Takes place in heaven. And we are given the admonition in track number 8, page 5. So, correctly to understand this prophetic event in its entirety, we must carefully differentiate the part which takes place in heaven from the part which takes place on earth. Carefully differentiate. Now, as far as the heavenly sanctuary is thus concerned, it is book transaction, bookwork transaction. According to White House Recruiter, page 20, it says, as the cleansing of the sanctuary in behalf of the dead is necessarily purely a book transaction, that is the reason for its taking place only in the heavenly sanctuary. White House Recruiter, page 20. Or in other words, the only proceedings that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary is bookwork transaction, by which, accordingly, in answerer number 5, page 30, that is the first aspect of the judgment. Now let us read answerer number 5, page 30. This is the first aspect of the judgment, and being only a bookwork, Daniel 7 verse 10, a work that does not disturb either the dead in the graves or the living in the church, it takes place in heaven. That is the spiritual side. There is no material side on earth. It does not disturb anybody. The occurrence takes place in heaven. And the most critical and most solemn of the event that will take place in the heavenly sanctuary is the pronouncement of such irrevocable decision. According to the great controversy, 490, saying the righteous and the wicked will still be living upon the earth in their mortal state. Men will be planting and building, eating and drinking, all unconscious that the final irrevocable decision has been pronounced in the sanctuary above. Before the flood, after Noah entered the ark, God shut him in and shut the ungodly out, but for 7 days. The people, knowing not that their doom was fixed, continued their careless, pleasure-loving life and mocked the warnings of impending judgment. So says the Savior, shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24 verse 39. Silently and notice as the midnight thief will come the decisive hour, which marks the fixing of every man's destiny, the final withdrawal of mercy offered to guilty men. The Great Controversy, page 490 and 491. Now, brothers and sisters, to repeat again, the statement in their mortal state, while they were still in their mortal state, cannot be applied to the righteous. It can only be applied to the wicked, because the statement will still be living upon the earth in their mortal state. Brothers and sisters, that statement, brothers and sisters, can be applied only to the righteous, because the righteous will be living in 2 periods of time, mortal state and then immortal. But immortality will never be granted to the wicked. So the statement, while they were still in their mortal state, can only be applied to the righteous and not to the wicked, because the wicked will always live in mortal state. Immortality will never be granted to the wicked. Immortality will be granted only to the righteous. So that statement, while in their mortal state, pertaining to the righteous, but the statement, all are unconscious that the final irrevocable decision has been pronounced in the sanctuary above, that must be pertaining to the wicked, because the righteous, they need to be conscious. They need to know, because the comparison given here, brothers and sisters, is to the wicked that had been destroyed by the flood, because they did not know that the flood was coming. And I would like to repeat again that if there is no possibility of knowing, then, brothers and sisters, they had been destroyed by God with no justice at all, if there is no possibility of knowing. So I would like to read again the statement here in 1888 message given by Alonzo Jones. A picture of the present condition of the mass of mankind is here drawn. The people of the last generation will be like that before the flood, while the ark was preparing. And I fully believe that. We are living in that generation. We are already in the last generation, brothers and sisters. This shows that we cannot innocently be ignorant on the subject of the Lord's soon coming. It will be a terrible calamity in that day to those who do not know, even as it was to the world in the days of Noah, because they did not know of the approaching time of the flood. If they had had no means of knowing, they would, of course, have been innocent and have escaped the destruction. But they might have known, for Noah warned them by his preaching, and yet more forcibly in building the ark. In this he condemned the world. Hebrews 11 verse 7. He proved his faith by his works. They proved their unbelief and were justly condemned. They turned away from his warnings and forgot his words, and so the flood came when they did not expect it. They did not know and took them all away. So will it be when the Son of Man is revealed. But the coming of the Son of Man mentioned there cannot be the visible coming. But it points out to the invisible coming of Jesus Christ when He will visit this earth and establish the kingdom. So to repeat again, the statement, the great controversy 490. To the righteous, the irrevocable decision in the heavenly sanctuary, it will be pronounced in the heavenly sanctuary while the righteous are still in their mortal state. While the righteous, immortality was not yet granted to them. And in the vision of John the Revelator, granting immortality was illustrated that they were already standing on the sea of glass. Therefore, we need to study closely when would be that predicted event that the 144,000 are standing on the sea of glass. And at that time, when they were standing on the sea of glass, immortality was granted. Here in 2SR page 199, 2SR 199, it says, in the judgment, it is granted to the saints that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, to stand on the sea of glass, life eternal. Revelation 15, verse 2. Or in other words, the irrevocable decision will be pronounced in the heavenly sanctuary before that event that the righteous, the 144,000, are standing on the sea of glass. Before immortality will be granted to them while they were still in their mortal state. But the statement that all of them are unconscious, they did not know anything, when the final irrevocable decision has been pronounced in the sanctuary above, must be pointing to the wicked, brothers and sisters. Now let us go back again to our subject. Very important subject, brothers and sisters. Now, we already explained that the four living creatures in Ezekiel chapter 1, according to track number 1, page 35, have the same complementary significance to the four beasts in Revelation 4 and 5. And we already read, who are they, the four beasts? The four representatives to be judged. Brothers and sisters, they are represented by the four representatives to be judged. Therefore, the four living creatures must be pointing to the four representatives also to be judged. Who are they? Since, brothers and sisters, the last two seals is pertaining to the judgment of the living, therefore these four must be in the period called the judgment of the living. The first two are those representatives by which their cases in the heavenly sanctuary are being judged while they were still living. While living. Brothers and sisters, while living. But the last two must be the first fruits, brothers and sisters, and the second fruits. And we know that the term while living cannot be applied to them because they will no longer to taste death. Therefore, we can easily understand that the sixth seal represented by the altar is divided into two classes. Isaiah 57:1 and Revelation 14:13. Now, let us read 1 SR page 219. Let us read the statement. For we read in Isaiah 57:1, the righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart. A merciful men are taken away, not considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. So, those who died from 1844 onwards, prior to the evil to come, they are represented by Isaiah 57:1. How about Revelation 14:13? Let us read and then go back here in 1 SR 219. 2 SR. Let us read here in 2 SR page 173. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yes, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Revelation 14:13. Which die from henceforth, that is, from the commencement of the loud cry, thus the word declares that some of the saints will be laid in the grave even during the time of harvest loud cry. We quote from Counsels on Health, page 375, many will be laid away to sleep before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble shall come upon the world. 2 SR 173. Now, there are two things that we need to observe in that paragraph. First, the quotation is Counsels on Health 375, that all the saints will be laid down to sleep prior to the commencement of the little time of trouble. The time of trouble is divided into two. The little time of trouble and the great time of trouble. We need to ever remember that, brothers and sisters. And the dividing line of the little time of trouble and the great time of trouble is the half-hour silence. The 7 days is slaughtering. Half-hour silence. Now, the shepherd's rod is very plain. More particularly here in 1 SR 219. Let's read again the statement. It says, again, we call your attention to the past and future tense of the scripture. While Revelation 14:13 is in future tense, Isaiah 57:1 is in past. This being present truth, it is easy to see that we at the present time stand between these two scriptures. And you know, in this paragraph, the statement in 2 SR 256 is really reality and applied to this paragraph. Let me read to you here in 2 SR 256, the statement. It says here, it is remarkable to note the perfect grammatical order of the words at the time of their application, clearly dividing the word of truth as though it were written just at the time the prophetic words are revealed. 2 SR 256. And this statement is really reality in this reading in 1 SR 219, because the statement, this being present truth, it is easy to see that we at the present time stand between these two scriptures. Cannot be applied in the days of BT Hotep. So, it seems that this statement, it seems that it is just written this year. Because the fulfillment of this statement in reality is this year. We are now standing between these two scriptures. And we will prove to you as we proceed in this study. But to repeat, that statement cannot be applied in the days of behind them, brothers and sisters. That Isaiah 57:1 is already in the past. Meaning, the entire constituent of Isaiah 57:1 is already finished, brothers and sisters. Or all of them were already dead. It cannot be applied in the days of behind them. And then, the statement we are standing between these two scriptures, it can be easily understood that the proceedings that pertains to the saints that will no longer to taste death was inserted between the proceeding of Isaiah 57:1 and Revelation 14:13. Or after Isaiah 57:1 is finished, then inserted the proceedings that pertains to the living, and then Revelation 14:13. Remember, brothers and sisters, according to our reading, that the cleansing in the heavenly sanctuary, we know that the cleansing in the heavenly sanctuary is pointing to the books. Clean books. The statement clean books, meaning all the names of the wicked are completely blotted out. Now let us read tract number 3 on page 73 and page 74. Being the day of atonement in type for both the dead and the living, this service of the earthly tabernacle therefore projects the day of atonement in its antitype, the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven from unworthy names in the books, and the cleansing of the church on earth from its unconverted and unstable members, thus bringing the time of clean books, clean church, and clean people. Tract number 3, 73 and page 74. And the statement is arranged in perfect order. Clean books first. Because the first aspect of the judgment is bookwork transaction. As we read several times, answerer number 5, page 30. The first aspect of the judgment is bookwork. And that bookwork transaction began in October 22, 1844. But the focal point is not the commencement or not in the time when the cleansing is still in progress, but to the time when on that final day of atonement, all the names of the wicked will be completely blotted out. Then, when all the names of the wicked are completely blotted out on that final last day of atonement, then that is the time by which bringing the time clean books. The shepherd's rod made it so plain in tract number 3, page 50 and page 51. Let us read. As the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary is a work of cleansing the books by blotting from them the names of both the backsliders and the tails, and as at the time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, the only ones who shall be delivered are those whose names are found written in the book. The cleansing of the books, therefore, obviously takes place before the resurrection and before the time of trouble such as never was. Thus the unfaithful dead will be left in their graves at the first resurrection, and the unfaithful living will be left without deliverance from the coming trouble. But were their names allowed to remain in the books, then according to the records, either the wicked dead would have to be resurrected with the righteous, and the living wicked delivered with the living righteous, or else both the righteous dead and the righteous living would have to be forsaken with them, alternatives, both of which, of course, are impossible. Track number 3, page 50 and page 51. Now, the shepherd's rod is trying to remind us, as far as the Bible is thus concerned, that according to the record of the Word of God in Daniel 12, verse 1 and 2, that any names found written in the Lamb's Book of Life at the commencement of the time of trouble, all of them will be saved. And then the shepherd's rod says, as God cannot deny His own words, right? According to Timothy, it says, He cannot deny Himself. God cannot deny His own words. If the names of the wicked will be allowed to remain there at the commencement of the time of trouble, the names of the wicked are still written in the Lamb's Book of Life, then of necessity, God will be obliged to save the wicked together with the righteous. Because that's what His words are plainly telling, that all the names recorded in the Lamb's Book of Life at the commencement of the time of trouble, all of them will be saved. That is why the shepherd's rod says, it is an impossible thing that God will save the wicked. Absolutely, therefore, brothers and sisters, it can be easily understood, as far as the records are thus concerned, that the books in the heavenly sanctuary will be completely cleansed prior to the commencement of the little time of trouble. Therefore, the cleansing of the books must be completely finished, completely accomplished prior to the commencement of the little time of trouble. Brothers and sisters, here in track number 5, let us read again 110 and 111. Revelation 11 verse 2, it says, but the court which is without the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. But why leave out the court? Why not measure it also? For since it is a part of the building, it too must be symbolical of saints. Obviously, because it represents the great multitude which no man could number, measure, of all nations, and kindreds, and peoples, and tongues. Revelation 7 verse 9. The last who come from among the Gentiles. The court, in other words, is symbolical of the immeasurable, innumerable harvest of second fruits, brought in after the measurable, numerable harvest of first fruits, the 144,000. It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Daniel 8 verse 14, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net, Matthew 13 verse 47 and 48. They are those who by name, my people, Revelation 18 verse 4, are called to come out of Babylon, and who, with no unclean among them, Isaiah 52 verse 1, come into the already purified and living church of God. Track number 5, 110 and 111. Now, let us apply the statement both the occurrence in the heavenly sanctuary and the occurrence on earth. The occurrence in the heavenly sanctuary, that is clean books. The shepherd's rod is very plain in track number 5, 110 and 111, that the constituent of the great multitude, when the message will be proclaimed to the great multitude in Revelation 7 verse 9, they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Track number 5, 110. After the cleansing of the heavenly temple. then we can easily understand that when the message goes to the great multitude, which no man could number, the cleansing in the heavenly sanctuary, the cleansing in the heavenly temple was completely finished. Because they will be converted, they will be gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. In track number 5, 110 and 111. Now we already read in 2SR page 173. Let us go back again to our reading. In 2SR page 173, it says here, "Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yes, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." Revelation 14 verse 13. "Which die from henceforth, that is, from the commencement of the loud cry. Thus the word declares that some of the saints will be laid in the grave, even during the time of the harvest loud cry." We quote from Counsels on Health, page 375, "Many will be laid away to sleep before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble will come upon the world." Now, for sure, the loud cry mentioned there is a loud cry message to the constituent of the great multitude. And in that proclamation of the loud cry message, brothers and sisters, in that proclamation, according to the voice of inspiration, in that period of time, after the 144,000 are completely sealed, in that period of time, there are still saints to die. And the saints that died in that period of time, they are the saints that had been laid down to sleep, as predicted in Counsels on Health 375, before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble. And that is why, brothers and sisters, that evil time mentioned in Isaiah 57:1, by which the constituent of the altar is divided into two classes, natural death and martyrs. The natural death are those who died under Isaiah 57:1 since 1844. All of them had been laid down to sleep before the evil time to come. And the evil time mentioned there, for sure, is the same with the statement in track number 12, page 28. Now, let me read to you. Track number 12 on page 28. It says here, "A full realization of the glorious reward that awaits mankind will even now compel men to shout for joy. And a like realization of the dreadful penalty that awaits all who fail to make God their refuge will cause them even now to weep and gnash their teeth, that all might realistically see these alternative prospects and be impelled thereby to repentance. The Lord has been at supreme pains not only to record a graphic description of the evil, which through the instrumentality of the beast, Satan has determined upon the whole world, but also aforehand to make of a similar evil a perfect type of the image of the beast. So the evil time, that is the time when the image of the beast will be enforced, brothers and sisters. But, brothers and sisters, let us distinctly separate the image of the beast, which is illustrated by the combined effort of the beast and the false prophet, because that is called by inspiration as National Alliance. Here in 2SR page 160, it says, "The tabulation of events in this chapter fully illustrate great prophetic occurrences that are to transpire in rapid succession as shown in the chart. The union of the churches represented by the woman sitting on the heads must take place before the combined power of the beast and the false prophet is fully realized. The symbol, false prophet and the beast, reveal that there shall be a national alliance of church and state. We know the image of the beast is called church and state union. Now let us read all symbolic code. Two symbolic code, number 7 and 8, page 12. The question is, will the churches unite before Ezekiel 9? Question. Will the nominal churches be united before the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 and before the loud cry of the third angel's message takes place? Answer. The churches may incompletely confederate almost any time, but the union of church and state, the image of the beast. So the image of the beast is called the union of church and state. But there are two descriptions of the image of the beast, the union of church and state. The combined power of the false prophet and the beast, or the President of the United States of America, it is called church and state, but national alliance. But the woman riding on the scarlet-colored beast, it is also church and state, image of the beast, but international alliance. But here, let us read two symbolic codes, 7 and 8, page 12. It says, the churches may incompletely confederate almost any time, but the union of church and state, the image of the beast, will take place only after the investigative judgment of the dead is completed. So it says the union of church and state, the image of the beast, will take place only after the investigative judgment of the dead is completed. And we already read that the loud cry to the great multitude is after the judgment of the dead. Now let us read again track number 5, 110 and 111. So let's go back again to the reading. It says, it is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, Daniel 8:14, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net, Matthew 13 verse 47 and 48. They are those who by name, my people, Revelation 18 verse 4, are called to come out of Babylon, and who with no unclean among them, Isaiah 52 verse 1, come into the already purified and living church of God. Track number 5, page 110 and 111. Now, it's easy to understand, brothers and sisters, that when the message will be proclaimed to the great multitude, which no man could number, by which let us distinctly separate the great multitude to be gathered during the great tribulation, the great multitude to be gathered during the little time of trouble, and the great multitude to be gathered during the great time of trouble. I would like to repeat again. Let us distinctly separate the great multitude to be gathered during the great tribulation and the great multitude to be gathered during the little time of trouble, and the great multitude to be gathered during the great time of trouble. First of all, brothers and sisters, we already proven many times that the constituent of the great multitude is two classes, the defiled and undefiled ones. Now let us read again the statement in track number 9. It says here, track number 9, page 56. To gather a class defiled with women as second fruits. This class of saints must be those who have at one time been married to some unchristian mistress, a heathen church, and who consequently are not descendants of either Jacob or the Christian church. So there are to be two harvests, one from the church and one from the world. The record of the former mentioned only Israelites, the 144,000, those not defiled with women. though it does not say that there may not be others, while the record of the latter, however, definitely embraces, remember the statement, definitely embraces a great multitude from all nations, which must necessarily be both of undefiled and defiled ones, Jews and Gentiles. Tract number 9, page 56. For sure, the undefiled ones, the constituent of the great multitude, must be the Jews. But they could not be the Jews, the identified Jews of today, because they did not accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah. But here in 2TG number 6, brothers and sisters, on page 16, so let us read this statement given by the Shepherd's Rod. It says, we must not overlook the fact that the gospel of Christ divided the house of Judah into two sects, Jewish and Christian. That the Christian church for about 4 years after the resurrection of Christ consisted practically only of Jews. Plainly then, the original Christians were full-blooded Jews. The Christian church is only a branch of the Jewish church, but they and their descendants have, through the years, lost the racial identity. Then through the descendants of both Israel and Judah, who through the years of captivity lost their identity as did the Jews who embraced Christianity, according to prophecy, must also have greatly multiplied. Plainly then, many who are taken as Gentiles are but unidentified descendants of ancient Judah, Israel, and the Jewish Christians. The Christian church herself is, as we have seen, a Jewish Christian church. But I would like to focus the statement. It says, many who are taken as Gentiles are but unidentified descendants of ancient Judah, Israel, and the Jewish Christians. So it points out to unidentified brothers and sisters, not the identified Jews of today. Now, to repeat again, because we are talking about trying to locate the slaughtering prior to the final close of provision of all Sabbath keepers and the slaughtering after the close of provision of all Sabbath keepers. And we firmly establish that Ezekiel 9 cannot be applied to the world. What world mentioned there in 1TG 3 page 12 and 1TG 21:15? To the non-Sabbath keepers. Therefore, the statement in 3 Symbolic Code 1 page 8 that the slaughtering in Ezekiel 9 has a double application. First, the double application is applied to the slaughtering by which it is 6 angels and the slaughtering by which it is 5 angels. And the second application of double application, the first application is the slaughtering prior to the final close of provision of all Sabbath keepers, and the second is after the close of provision to all Sabbath keepers. Now, let us now study closely, brothers and sisters, to this very important subject. We already read, brothers and sisters, that there are only 2 fruits. The first fruit, 144,000 is spiritual Israel, and the second fruit, the great multitude. But the absolute fact is that the entire constituent of the great multitude, according to tract number 9, page 56, is divided into 2 classes, defiled and undefiled. Therefore, there must be a constituent of the great multitude by which they were not defiled with women. Undefiled. They were not defiled. And since it was enumerated, the Jews and the Gentiles, so the Jews must be pertaining to the Sabbath keepers, not the identified Jews of today. To the rest of the Sabbath keepers, not under the banner of the third angel's message. Because the Sabbath keepers under the banner of the third angel's message, we call them as the spiritual Israel. And the saints to be gathered from the spiritual Israel are only 144,000 living saints, brothers and sisters. So, we are now focusing our attention to the constituent of the great multitude to be converted during the Great Tribulation. All of them that will be converted during the Great Tribulation are all Sabbath keepers, the undefiled ones in the great multitude, because the great multitude is the antitypical Enoch. The type is Enoch. And it is even more applicable to the Sabbath keepers because Enoch is a Sabbath keepers or a Sabbath keeper, brothers and sisters. So the only constituent of the great multitude that exactly fits and perfectly matched to Enoch must be the Sabbath keepers among the great multitude. Now let us read 2 TG 43:24. It says, "Here you see that not only will God cleanse His church, Judah and Israel, by taking away all those who pollute His house of prayer, but that afterwards He will gather into His purifying church." The purified church mentioned here is the spiritual Israel. God will gather into His purified church all the dispersed who have descended from both the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, and the kingdom of Judah, the 2 tribes, who are now out among the nations, not in the church of the Laodiceans. He will make them one nation. And if you will connect track number 5, the statement also, gathered into the already purified church of God. Now, let us read again in track number 5, 110 and 111. It says, "It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bed to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple." Daniel 8:14, "After the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good," in the church as illustrated by the parable of the net, Matthew 13 verse 47 and 48. "They are those who by name my people," Revelation 18 verse 4, "are called to come out of Babylon, and who with no unclean among them," Isaiah 52 verse 1, "come into the already purified and living church of God." Come, or they are brought into the already purified living church of God. The same with this statement. And it says, it points out to the ancient 12 tribes that lost the racial identity. They will be gathered in to the purified church. Those who have been dispersed out among the nations, not in the church of the Laodiceans. So it points out to the 12 tribes, brothers and sisters, the 12 tribes. And they are designated as my people. Let me read to you here in track number 4. What does it mean? Page 12. Track number 4, page 12. It says here, "The same pair of children introduced in the first chapter of the vision are in the second chapter redenominated. The difference between that from both names is dropped the prefix lo, which is in the Hebrew means no. Accordingly, whereas lo ruhama means no mercy, and lu amai, not my people, ruhama means mercy, and amai, my people." So what does it mean? By name, they are called my people. It points out, brothers and sisters, to the reacceptance of the 12 tribes. Here in track number 8, let us read track number 8, page 12. It says, track number 8, page 12, and it is entitled, "One Great Kingdom." Now, let me read to you, track number 8, page 12. In the upper portion, it says, "Better understand God's plan for the ingathering of the 12 tribes of Israel and for reuniting them in one great kingdom." One great kingdom, brothers and sisters. That is pointing to the type and antitype. Who are they, the type? The ancient Israel. The antitype, the spiritual Israel. Here in 2 TJ number 4, it says, page 14, "Here we are plainly told that the two ancient kingdoms, the types he is to restore and join and so bring out the antitype to TG 4:14. The type are the literal 12 tribes. The antitype is the spiritual 12 tribes. They will be united as one great kingdom. So let us read this statement in track number 8, page 12. It says here, brothers and sisters, and ponder deeply. It says, hearing Christ's teachings, then rejecting them and crucifying him, the Jewish nation brought upon their heads the doom which God pronounced upon them when through his prophet he declared, ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Though at the same time, in his great mercy, he let the promise be written in the places where it was said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are not my people. There it shall be said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are the sons of the living God. Romans 9:24 to 26. Therefore, Apostle Paul is telling you and I, brothers and sisters, first pertaining to the rejection of ancient Israel at the end of the 490 years in October 16, 34 AD. But at the same time, there is a predicted event of reacceptance. And if you will look at to page 16 in track number 8, it says here, track number 8, page 16 and 17, this illustrated prophecy scarcely needs to be interpreted as it is virtually self-explanatory, showing that the two ancient kingdoms, Judah and Israel, will yet be gathered from among the heathen, among whom they have long been scattered, and that they will become again one great nation, a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Daniel 2, verse 44. So, that is pointing to the fulfillment in Daniel 2, verse 44. Now, let us go back to our main subject, because our main subject in reality is concerning the occurrence in the heavenly sanctuary. But, brothers and sisters, while studying the occurrences in the heavenly sanctuary, it is in absolute importance also to connect the occurrence on the earth. Now, let us now try to enumerate again the highlights and the important points. The cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven is bookwork transaction. And the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven is pointing to the blotting out of names. When all the names of the wicked will be completely blotted out, that is the time by which Daniel 8:14 is completely fulfilled. Brothers and sisters, the sanctuary been cleansed. No more names of the wicked still remain in the Lamb's Book of Life. Now, the statement given in the Shepherd's Rod first, in track number 3, page 50 and 51, that the cleansing of the books in the heavenly sanctuary must be completely finished before the commencement of the little time of trouble. Because the voice of inspiration plainly telling that at the commencement of the time of trouble, if there are still any names of the wicked allowed to be remain in that book, and since God cannot deny himself, the record of his own words plainly declared that at the commencement of the time of trouble, all the names found written in the Lamb's Book of Life will be saved. So if any names of the wicked still remain in the Lamb's Book of Life at the commencement of the time of trouble, then God will be obliged to save the wicked, by which it is impossible. Then absolutely, therefore, the names of the wicked will be completely blotted out prior to the commencement of the little time of trouble. But it is even more nearer the statement in track number 5, page 110 and 111. Because that statement says that at the commencement of the message to the loud cry proclamation, to the constituent of the great multitude, when that message will be proclaimed unto them, that is after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Therefore, when the loud cry proclamation commenced to the great multitude which no man could number, the cleansing of the books in the heavenly sanctuary is already finished. Why? Because all the names to be inscribed in the Lamb's Book of Life at the second section of the harvest, there will be no more wicked to be converted. And all the names that will be written in the Lamb's Book of Life at that time are only the names of the righteous. And that event must be after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, according to track number 5110. Now, we already read in 2SR 173 that the loud cry proclamation of the great multitude is after the 144,000 are completely sealed and during the time by which Revelation 14:13 will be fulfilled. Blessed are those who die in the Lord from henceforth. What does it mean, the word from henceforth? In 1SR 219, it says, let's read 1SR page 219. Note that after the sealing of the 144,000, there would be some who would die in the Lord, save for the scripture reads from henceforth, meaning from the time this company was sealed. 1SR 219. The word henceforth, meaning up to the time when the 144,000 will be completely sealed. From that time onwards, after the 144,000 are completely sealed, the loud cry to the great multitude will begin, according to 2SR 173. But in that loud cry proclamation, there are still saints to die. Therefore, it could not be the loud cry proclamation during the time of trouble, the little time of trouble, because the statement in 1SR 219, as quoted in Councils on Health 375, all the saints who are destined for grave and resurrection, all of them will be laid down to sleep before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble. 2SR 173, Councils on Health 375. Because they cannot undergo the trouble or the hardship during the time of trouble. And in order to save them, God laid them down to sleep. And that's why the Shepherd's Rod says that the balance of the church in the commencement of the time of trouble is only living righteous and living wicked. Or in other words, at the commencement of the time of trouble onwards, the only human being that will die are the wicked. Because there will be no more death, no funeral sermons, brothers and sisters, that is intended to the righteous. There will be no more righteous to die. Now let us read 1SR 219. It says, those who cannot undergo the trial are laid in their graves. What trial? The fiery ordeal of the time of trouble. Those who cannot undergo the trial are laid in their graves, while the 144,000 remain and will escape. But the balance in the church now, the word now is pointing to the commencement of the time of trouble, shall perish in the ruin. May God help His people. Now, let us try to summarize our subject, brothers and sisters. The very first loud cry proclamation is during the Great Tribulation. What is the difference between Great Tribulation and time of trouble? In the Great Tribulation, there are still saints to die. Let us distinctly separate the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24:21 and the Great Tribulation in Revelation 7, verse 14. The Shepherd's Rod declared clearly here in 2SR 166, it says, therefore, this great multitude is gathered from all nations after the closing work for the church in the time of the great harvest. Although we'll explain it later. The term all nations to be gathered, brothers and sisters, during the Great Tribulation are all the Sabbath keepers, brothers and sisters. During the Great Tribulation are all the Sabbath keepers. And they are the one designated by God as my people. In track number 5, 110, 111. The reacceptance of the 12 tribes that had been scattered abroad and lost their racial identity. But they are the Sabbath keepers that acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Messiah, not the identified Jews of today. Now, I would like to read again. It says, therefore, this great multitude is gathered from all nations after the closing work for the church and in the time of the great harvest. The palms in their hands signify victory over the beast and his image, death and the grave. One of the elders before the throne said of them, these are they which came out of great tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. Verse 14 on Revelation chapter 7. For example, here in track number 9, it says here, let us read, page 69. From this, the truth is again seen that the first and the second fruits of the living, the one gathered from within the church at the commencement of the great and dreadful day, and the other gathered out of Babylon during that day, constitute the kingdom at its beginning and before the resurrection of the dead. We know the very first resurrection is pointing to the resurrection in Daniel chapter 12. Those who died under the third angel's message, Daniel 12 verse 1, verse 2, and verse 3. And they will be resurrected during the 7 days half-hour silence. But that is at the end part of the 7 days slaughtering. Brothers and sisters, Daniel 12, verse 1 and 2, they will be resurrected because during the 7 days, Jacob's trouble, according to 2SR 163, it says, we quote from the writings of the Spirit prophecy, this was the time of Jacob's trouble. Then all the saints cried out with anguish of spirit and were delivered by the voice of God. The 144,000 triumphed. Their faces were lighted up with the glory of God. Life Sketches, page 117. Note that the 144,000 in number were present in the time of Jacob's trouble. According to the following quotation, the time of trouble commences immediately after the close of provision, when Christ shall cease his work as mediator in man's behalf. Then this time of trouble will begin. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 201. That time of trouble is before any of the sleeping saints are resurrected. Therefore, the 144,000 are not resurrected, but are living saints who have never tasted death and are to be translated at the second coming of Christ. 2SR 163. So the voice of inspiration is plainly telling us, brothers and sisters, that the 7 days half-hour silence, within that period of time, the 7 days of slaughtering, the 7 days Jacob's trouble, within that period of time, 7 days, there was no saint as yet been resurrected. Therefore, Daniel 12, verse 1 and 2, the very first resurrection, special resurrection, will take place immediately after the Jacob's trouble, after the 7 days slaughtering. Because according to that reading in 2SR 163, in that period of time, there is not any saint that had been resurrected. But let us go back first to the event Great Tribulation. The statement in track number 9, page 69, that the great multitude will be gathered prior to the resurrection of the dead. There are at least two to be gathered prior to the resurrection of the dead. The constituent of the great multitude during the great tribulation, and the constituent of the great multitude during the time of trouble. The loud cry proclamation to be proclaimed, brothers and sisters, during the great tribulation is addressed to all Sabbath keepers. The constituent of the great multitude by which categorized as undefiled, as stated in track number 9, page 56. Also in track number 3, page 73. It is called the undefiled. And the fulfillment of that statement, track number 5, 110 and 111, by which the message that will be proclaimed to the constituent of the great multitude, the very first one must be to the people by which, by name, they are called my people. And who are they? Amai, according to track number 4, page 12. And who are they, Amai? They are the Jewish people that had been rejected by God in 34 AD. In October 16, 34 AD. If God rejected them because of rejecting Jesus Christ as the Messiah, then it is illogical that God would re-accept them the same attitude and the same nature. Do not recognize Jesus Christ as the Messiah. And that is why the prediction in track number 8, page 12, the reacceptance of those people by which lost their racial identity must be to them by which they already accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Or in other words, they must be the Sabbath-keeping Christian. The Sabbath keepers by which they were Christian. Christian Sabbath keepers. And they will be converted to the message during the Great Tribulation, by which according to 2SR 173, during that time, there are still saints to die, and they are the constituent of Revelation 14:13, by which they are the very ones by which their cases are already in proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary while living and then destined to die. Or in other words, we can easily discern that after the proceedings of Revelation 14:13, those people to be considered in the judicial proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary while they were still alive, and after their cases are completely finished, then commence the Great Tribulation, the appointed time by which they were appointed to die. So, it's easy to understand, brothers and sisters, that the Great Tribulation will immediately follow after the last and the final Day of Atonement. What is the last and the final Day of Atonement? The blotting out of names. The blotting out of names commenced in October 22, 1844, and it progresses every year. Every year there is a Day of Atonement. But here comes the time, the final Day of Atonement, by which in that Day of Atonement, all the names that are written therein will be completely blotted out. And that is already pertaining to the worshipers. Immediately follow after the proceedings concerning those people who are judged while living. Then after being judged, brothers and sisters, then commence the proceedings that pertains to the worshipers, because the great multitude will no longer be investigated. No more blotting out of names, for they will be converted after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Track number 5, 110 and 111. But this is the most important thing, brothers and sisters, that we need to focus our attention. that proceedings by which those who will be judged in that proceedings are the constituent of Revelation 14:13, by which they are being judged while living, brothers and sisters, is after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Now, let us read 2SR 162. The cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final clause of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living. We need to remember the divine principle in the inspired words, that the word all must be applied to the last. For example, the statement, all will be restored. I would like to use that example in 1 TG so that we could understand. 1 TG number 28, page 15. It says, this message, therefore, is the one that precedes the harvest of the earth, the great and dreadful day of the Lord, the judgment for the living, the day in which all things are to be restored. That statement that in the period of the judgment for the living, all things are to be restored, cannot be construed that the restoration commences in the judgment for the living, because that is not the restoration. The word restoration is applied to the truth that had been trodden underfoot by the exceeding great horn. But such restoration commenced even in the days of Martin Luther. Here in 1SR Packet Edition, page 81. It is widely understood that during the period from the canonizing of the New Testament scriptures to the call of Martin Luther, the truth was cast to the ground, Daniel 8 verse 12, and that it then began to be lifted, first by the Lutheran preaching the doctrine of faith, the beginning of the Reformation, then followed by a portion of time successively by the Presbyterian. 1SR Packet Edition, page 81. So, in 1500 AD, it is the process of restoration. The word all cannot be applied not until the time arrived that the last portion of the truth will be finally be restored. And for sure, it is even more particularly to the Bible calendar, because the Shepherd's Rod made it so plain in track number 10. Track number 10, page 38. Do the nations of today do not follow the biblical monthly calendar that in no wise alters the fact that the original weekly cycle has never been changed, and as it is entirely independent of both the solar and the lunar calendars? Had God not preserved it intact throughout all the ages, the saints now, in the time of restitution of all things, would have great difficulty to restore it and to vindicate its integrity. Track number 10, page 38. Since the weekly cycle had never been changed, never been destroyed, then no need to restore it because it was not destroyed. And the principal reason and purpose why God preserved it intact throughout the ages, the weekly cycle, is the purpose that at the time, when in the time of restitution of all things, when was that? Judgment for the living. The saints would have no difficulty to restore the Bible monthly and yearly calendar, the creation calendar, to vindicate its integrity. So what I'm trying to emphasize, the statement, the cases of all who are sealed from 1929, the word all must be applied to the time when the cases that are considered is the cases of those people while living. They were investigated in the heavenly sanctuary before the throne while living. Then that what it means, that is the last constituent of the sixth seal. Then you can apply the word all because they are the last to be considered in the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. And that is the reason in 2 TG 12:30 it is called judgment of the living, in spite of the fact that it is the sixth seal, because they are being judged while living. But the absolute fact is that it says the investigation commences after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. And you need to study closely the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9, because if you cannot establish clearly the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9, then there is no possibility that you could understand when that proceedings begins, brothers and sisters, the proceedings by which those who are destined to die, they are being judged while living. That after their proceedings had been completely finished, they are destined to die in the great tribulation, brothers and sisters. So, hoping that you will abide listening and viewing this program, and to repeat again, at the end of all the subjects, we will show to you a chart, a diagram, so that you could easily comprehend the subject. But we would like first to explain all the necessary information before showing to you the chart or the diagram, brothers and sisters. So hoping you will listen to all our videos, watch our videos, brothers and sisters, and more particularly also to the subject, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. We'll continue this subject on the next episode. And may the good Lord bless you and have a wonderful evening.